The wilderness was still. After the long journey from Egypt, the Israelites stood before the towering slopes of Mount Sinai. The mountain loomed vast and gray against the pale desert sky. A hush fell upon the camp. They had arrived at the very mountain of God. Tents were pitched at its base. Men, women, and children stared upward with awe and uncertainty. Thunder rumbled from its peaks, and flashes of lightning flickered across the summit. Smoke drifted down like a veil. Even before God spoke, the mountain trembled. God called Moses to ascend. Alone, he climbed higher, the sound of the people fading behind him. Wind tore through the rocks. At the summit, wrapped in a holy cloud, God spoke, "Tell the people they must consecrate themselves. In 3 days I will descend." Moses returned with the command. The people washed their garments. They waited. The 3rd day came with a storm, dark clouds, fire and thunder. A trumpet blasted louder and louder until the mountain shook violently. Then God descended in fire. Mount Sinai was wrapped in smoke. The whole nation stood trembling. No one dared move. Children clung to their mothers. Warriors bowed low. From the fire and cloud, God summoned Moses once more. And as the prophet climbed again into the blazing mystery, Israel held its breath. Now they would meet the might of God, not just as deliverer, but as lawgiver, as king. At the summit of Sinai, amid fire, smoke, and thunder, Moses stood alone in the presence of the Almighty. The voice of God, more terrible than a storm or sword, spoke words not only for him, but for every man, woman, and child below. "I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt." And then one by one, God gave the 10 Commandments. "You shall have no other gods before me." The heavens echoed, "You shall not make for yourself an idol. You shall not misuse the name of the Lord your God. Remember the Sabbath day, to keep it holy. Honor your father and mother. You shall not murder. You shall not commit adultery. You shall not steal. You shall not bear false witness. You shall not covet." These were not merely rules. They were a covenant, a divine bond, a holy foundation for a nation born out of bondage, a people who would belong not to Pharaoh, but to God alone. As the commandments echoed across the wilderness, fear overwhelmed the people. They begged Moses to speak for them, trembling that they might die if God's voice continued. Moses assured them, "Do not be afraid. God has come to test you, so that the fear of him will keep you from sinning." When Moses descended, his face was alight with glory. He brought not only commandments carved in stone, but a new identity for Israel, a kingdom of priests, a holy nation. Children memorized the laws, elders recited them under starlight. These words, simple and eternal, became the heartbeat of the people. They would shape justice. They would echo in every tent, every village, every generation. From slavery, they had been rescued. At Sinai, they were claimed, no longer wandering tribes, but a people set apart, bound by fire, by law, and by the voice of the living God. Days turned to weeks. Moses remained on mountain, wrapped in the cloud of God's presence. The people below grew restless. "What has become of Moses?" they whispered. Fear gave way to doubt, doubt to rebellion. They turned to Aaron. "Make us gods to go before us," they demanded. Aaron, yielding to pressure, asked for their gold earrings. He melted them down and fashioned a golden calf. "This," he proclaimed, "is your God, O Israel, who brought you out of Egypt." The people cheered. They danced, feasted, and worshipped the idol. Drums beat. Laughter rang out. But above the mountain, God saw everything. "Go down," he thundered to Moses. "Your people have corrupted themselves." Moses descended with the tablets of the covenant in his hands. As he approached the camp, his heart sank. The golden idol gleamed in the firelight. Israel had forsaken the God who saved them. In righteous fury, Moses smashed the stone tablets. He seized the calf, burned it, ground it to powder, and made the people drink the ashes in water. Then he cried, "Who is on the Lord's side?" The sons of Levi stepped forward. That day, judgment fell upon the camp and thousands perished. But Moses returned to the mountain. With heavy heart, he pleaded for mercy. "If you will not forgive them, blot me out of your book," he cried. God relented. Though the wound was deep, his covenant would stand. New tablets were carved. The people mourned. And once again, the glory of the Lord settled on Sinai. Through judgment and mercy, the lesson was clear. God was holy, not to be replaced, not to be fashioned, and not to be forgotten. After the golden calf sin, the Israelites longed to draw near to the God who had forgiven them. God, in his mercy, gave instructions for the tabernacle, a sacred tent where his presence would dwell among his people. Every tribe joined in the effort. Some brought gold and silver, others precious stones, fine linen, and animal skins. Craftsmen, filled with the Spirit of God, shaped every detail: the Ark of the Covenant, the golden lampstand, the altar of incense, and the great bronze basin. The people gave so generously that Moses had to command them to stop bringing offerings. With reverence, they assembled the sacred structure, following every command exactly. At its center, behind a veil, stood the most holy place, the dwelling of God's glory. Once completed, a cloud covered the tabernacle, and the glory of the Lord filled it. By day the cloud rested above it. By night fire lit the camp. When the cloud lifted, the people knew to move. When it stayed, they remained still. Through the tabernacle, God signaled his commitment. He would be with them, guide them, and dwell in their midst. In the heart of the wilderness, where no nation could survive alone, Israel was not abandoned. They were accompanied by the divine presence. The tabernacle was not just a tent, it was the center of their identity, the sign of their restored relationship, and a continual reminder that they were chosen to walk with God. The wilderness became Israel's classroom. With the tabernacle at their center, the tribes camped in ordered formation and moved only at God's command. But the journey was not smooth. Hunger gripped them, and they cried out in complaint. God answered with manna from heaven, white flakes like dew that appeared each morning. When they thirsted, Moses struck a rock, and water gushed out. When enemies attacked, God gave victory through obedience and faith. Yet the people grumbled. They remembered Egypt's food and forgot its chains. Rebellion flared often against Moses, against God. Miriam and Aaron questioned Moses' leadership and were rebuked. Korah led a revolt and was swallowed by the earth. At each turn, God disciplined, yet provided. He was shaping a new people, one no longer bound by slavery, but by faith. Fire led them by night, cloud by day. Trumpets signaled their departures. The Levites carried the holy things. Tribes followed in line, banners raised high. When they reached hostile lands, God fought for them. But still they feared. He taught them obedience through trials, trust through silence, and hope through hardship. Over the years, sandals did not wear out, clothes did not tear. Every step tested them, every delay refined them. They were no longer a mob of former slaves. They were becoming a nation. In these long, dry miles, Israel learned that freedom without faith is fragile. The wilderness was not just a path to the promised land. It was a proving ground for their hearts. God was not simply delivering them from Egypt. He was delivering Egypt from within them. Each lesson carved a covenant deeper into their lives. By the time they neared the border of Canaan, a generation had passed, but a nation had been born. As the Israelites camped near the edge of the promised land, God instructed Moses to send one leader from each tribe to scout Canaan. For 40 days, the 12 spies journeyed through the land, from lush valleys to fortified cities. They returned carrying a cluster of grapes so large it had to be slung on a pole between two men. But their report divided the camp. 10 spies described giants, high walls, and strong armies. "We are like grasshoppers in their eyes," they said. And fear spread like fire. Only Joshua and Caleb stood firm. "The land is good," they urged. "If God delights in us, he will give it to us. Do not be afraid." But the people refused to believe. They wept through the night and called for a return to Egypt. They threatened to stone Moses and choose a new leader. In that moment, They rejected the very promise God had made to their ancestors. God's judgment was swift. This generation, he declared, would not enter the land. For every day the spies were in Canaan, they would wander 1 year in the wilderness, 40 years of delay. Only Joshua and Caleb, the faithful ones, would live to see the fulfillment. The people mourned, but it was too late. In pride, some tried to take the land on their own, but without God's presence, they were defeated. This moment marked a turning point. The door to the land had opened, but unbelief slammed it shut. God was not only giving them land, he was asking for trust. And when trust failed, so did the journey forward. The refusal to enter Canaan brought a heavy consequence. The Israelites would wander in the desert until the generation of unbelief was gone. What could have been a short journey stretched into 4 decades of circling sands and fading dreams. This long delay was not without purpose. In the wilderness, children grew up watching the cloud and fire. They learned from their parents' failures and God's persistent faithfulness. Even in judgment, he fed them, sheltered them, and forgave again and again. But rebellion still echoed. When Korah, Dathan, and Abiram rose up against Moses and Aaron, claiming equal authority, God acted decisively. The earth split open beneath them. Fire consumed others. The message was clear. God had chosen his leaders, and he would not be challenged. Later, venomous snakes plagued the camp after another wave of complaints. Many died until Moses, at God's command, lifted a bronze serpent on a pole. Whoever looked upon it in faith lived. This became a symbol of healing and salvation, not just for that moment, but for generations to come. As the years passed, camps were set up and torn down again and again. Old men remembered Egypt, but never saw Canaan. Children grew into warriors. God gave them victories over enemy, kings east of the Jordan, hinting at the promise still ahead. By the end of 40 years, the people had changed. No longer slaves, no longer grumblers. A generation prepared in silence, waiting for the day they would cross over. The wilderness was not only a punishment, it was a place of shaping. In every loss, every provision, every judgment, and every miracle, God was preparing his people. When they finally stood at the border again, it was not as a broken group of exiles, but as an army of believers ready to claim the land. Moses had led Israel for 40 years through plagues, through parted seas, through rebellion and renewal. Now standing on Mount Nebo, he looked across the Jordan River at the Promised Land. The land flowed with hills and valleys, with cities and fields. But Moses would not enter it. Though he had been faithful, a single moment of disobedience, striking the rock instead of speaking, had cost him the journey's end. Still, God granted him a final view. Jericho's walls, the hills of Ephraim, the waters of Galilee. It was enough. There on the mountain, Moses died as the servant of the Lord. God himself buried him in a hidden valley. No one knew the exact place, but his legacy was not buried. It lived on in the people he led and in the word he recorded. He was 120 years old, yet his eyes were not dim, and his strength had not left him. Israel mourned for 30 days. They remembered the man who had stood before Pharaoh, who had spoken with God face to face, who had taught them the law and interceded for their lives. Joshua, his faithful assistant, was filled with the Spirit and now took command. The mantle passed, the journey continued. Moses' life was a bridge from slavery to freedom, from promise to preparation. Though he did not step foot in the land, his faithfulness brought Israel to its edge, and his voice, through the scrolls he wrote, would echo through generations to come. Then, just as God had ordained, leadership passed to Joshua, son of Nun. The mantle of vision and courage rested now on new shoulders. The day had come at last. After 40 years in the wilderness, the people of Israel stood again at the edge of a river. This time not the Red Sea, but the Jordan overflowing its banks during harvest. The Promised Land lay just commanded Joshua, "Tell the priests to carry the Ark of the Covenant and go before the people. As soon as their feet touch the water, the river will stop." The priests, steady and reverent, lifted the Ark, God's holy presence, and stepped into the water, At once, the flow of the Jordan halted, piling up far upstream. A dry path opened through the riverbed. 12 tribes walked across in silence, awestruck by the miracle, repeating the Red Sea crossing of their parents' generation. Stones were taken from the riverbed, one for each tribe, and raised as a memorial on the western shore. God was making a statement: "As I was with Moses, so I will be with Joshua." When the priests stepped out of the river, the waters rushed back in place. The people camped at Gilgal, just east of Jericho, filled with anticipation and holy fear. The conquest of the land would be no small task, but now they knew God's power was with them. The dry path through Jordan marked not just a physical crossing, but a spiritual turning point. Slavery was behind them, wandering was over, a new era had begun. Jericho stood like a fortress of defiance. Its thick walls towered into the sky, armed, shut tight, and seemingly impenetrable. To Israel, this was the first test in the land. To God, it was a moment to reveal his power. But his instructions to Joshua were strange. "March around the city once a day for 6 days," God said. "On the 7th day, march 7 times. Then blow the trumpets, and the walls will fall. No siege engines, no weapons drawn, just obedience and faith." So they marched, silent, steady, circling the city once each day. Jericho's soldiers peered from the walls, puzzled and mocking. Still Israel marched day after day. On the 7th day, they marched 7 times. Then came the blast of the trumpets, and a great shout from the people. Suddenly, the walls crumbled, not brick by brick, but all at once. Dust filled the sky. Cries rang out. Jericho's mighty defenses lay in ruins. Israel surged in and captured the city. Rahab and her family, rescued because of her faith, were spared and welcomed into the people of God. It was not by strength but by obedience and divine power that Jericho fell. The lesson was clear: the battle belongs to the Lord. The conquest of Canaan unfolded like a rising storm. With God's direction, Joshua led Israel from city to city, Jericho to Ai, southward to Gibeon and beyond. Kings and coalitions rose to resist them. Armies gathered like waves, but none could stand. At Gibeon, God hurled hailstones from the sky and made the sun stand still, stretching daylight so that Israel's victory would be complete. At Hazor, a mighty city, fire devoured the stronghold. Though each battle was hard fought, the victories were not Israel's alone. God had promised the land. God had gone before them. Still, the conquest was not swift. Years passed. Lands were claimed, borders drawn, and territory divided among the 12 tribes. Yet not every Canaanite was driven out. Some regions remained contested, seeds of future struggle. But for the first time in generations, the people of Israel had a homeland. Camps became settlements. Tents gave way to towns. Before they could rest, there was one final task: to choose whom they would serve. Joshua gathered all Israel at Shechem, elders, leaders, families. The air was still. The mountains echoed their voices. He reminded them of their history. "Your ancestors worshipped other gods, but the Lord brought Abraham from beyond the river. He brought you out of Egypt. He gave you this land." Then he issued the challenge: "Choose this day whom you will serve. As for me and my house, we will serve the Lord." The people answered with one voice, "We too will serve the Lord. He is our God." A covenant was renewed. A stone was set under the oak tree as a witness. They had crossed rivers, faced giants, marched through fire and fear. But now, in peace, they pledged their hearts once more. The wilderness was behind them. The Israelites buried the bones of Joseph in the land his father Jacob had purchased. Jacob bought this land from the sons of Hamor. Shechem had a long history before this day. Jacob arrived here after returning from Paddan Aram. He paid silver for a plot of ground. He built an altar and called on the name of the Lord. From Jacob's settlement nearby to Shechem, Jacob's daughter, Dinah, came into the city to find local girls. On her way, she was violated by Shechem, son of Hamor. Simeon and Levi attacked the men of the city. Many were killed. Years later, Jacob sent Joseph to find his brothers near Shechem. Joseph met a stranger in the fields. The man said his brothers had moved to Dothan. Joseph followed. There he was captured and sold. Now Israel stood in Shechem again. Joshua called the people together. The elders and leaders came. Families gathered. The oak tree cast a wide shadow, a promise fulfilled.